Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to take off my moderator hat and just say that was deeply resonant. I loved your speech, and I think it connected really well with our morning conversation and some of the side conversations we've been having about how do you know about flourishing, and how do we bring in the different pathways of knowing: science, reason, imagination, intuition, experience, all of those together, and it's beautiful articulation of that. I know we're going to have comments and questions to that kind of provocation, so please hold those comments. But I want to give our panel a chance to respond to Jonathan, share their own stories, their own perspectives on this morning's content as well. And we've already introduced Jim Ritchie Dunham, but we're going to introduce two other individuals that it's an interesting thread between both of their bios. You mentioned this idea of conflict, this idea of the system breaking down, and we actually have some interesting perspectives on that, both at a theoretical and practical level, and in a real life story that we're all watching unfold on TV, on the news. First, I'd like to introduce Tuscia Shmorhun Hawrylyshyn. Is that right? Is that good? Okay. We practiced beforehand because I'm learning the Ukrainian pronunciation. And Crenguta Leaua. Thank you for both coming. Crenguta has already introduced herself and had showed that beautiful connection with the idea of her name in the tree. But she is a director of the Fetzer Institute for Alternative Thinking and has a very distinguished background in law, but also conflict resolution, and is applying these principles inside organizations and across organizations as they resolve conflict, work together, collaborate. There's a lot of connections with what Jim has been doing in his work as well. Tuscia is doing some incredible work with a very relevant topic right now, all the internal displaced people that are coming from conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And we were just speaking on the break. I'm really interested to hear your reflections on how conflict changes or impacts the way you see some of the things we've talked about this morning. So I want to turn it to you and just hear more about your story first, and hear about your work, Tuscia, and how this is connecting to you based on the journey you've been on with your work with internal displaced people in Ukraine.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for this. Been very moved in many different ways since this morning. My name is Tuscia. I'm a Swiss Canadian born. I'm connected with a Canadian early on, raised in Switzerland, and lived in several countries, raised our family in several countries, have been a permanent resident of Ukraine since 2010, although the first time we moved there was in 1992. I've been asked I've been listening very attentively all morning and this afternoon. Parts of me felt that I was in an unreal setting, but of course I'm also living an unreal setting. So I guess there's a reason that I've been asked to come and share my story. I won't start with, so I do live in Ukraine. I made the choice, and my husband made it separately for himself, because we are parents of grown children, that we would not leave Ukraine if a war on Ukraine was declared by Russia. And we have, and instead of maybe a poem or a quote, I want to share this with you for just a short moment. Because, oh, don't tell me I lost it. How do I find in this my saved stuff, you know?
Nope.
Sorry. I had prepared it. Well, it was pretty, okay. I wanted to share a sound that's become a reality for me, and that somehow I even heard at lunch when I was walking, and I know it wasn't that sound. It's the airstrike alarm. I never thought I would live with that in my life, and I would be so sensitive now to all noises. So we're here to talk about philanthropy. I am in a country of millions of philanthropists today. I am a country where humanity is being destroyed, where, Carmen, I think you said we should find out what we can do to avoid another Auschwitz. It's happening under my nose, under all of your noses. It is happening. There's cultural, there's a genocide on people, there's a genocide on the culture. There are churches being bombed, there are museums being bombed, children, adults, monasteries, electro station now. What's next? And in the face of this, which is when we talk about flourishing humanity, we're talking about good. I've lived with good. I've been taught to live with good, and I have found a lot of good in my life, which probably brought me here. What I haven't been taught about is how do you deal with hate? How do you deal with 10-year-olds? That all of a sudden, my little goddaughters, twin goddaughters, with whom I spent the first 10 days of war in Kiev, where the Russians were 2 kilometers away from the house. How do you deal with a little girl that 2 days before was preparing for her gymnastic competition to turn around and show me on her iPad the drawing she's staring with her friends who left Kiev, and she says, that's the enemy. How do you deal with, for the first time, I am 65, I have never heard or heard that word used in my life, and certainly not by a child. So when we're talking about a new cultural paradigm or a new cultural framework, I kept thinking, well, if some of these people came to Ukraine, they'd find some answers to what flourishing humanity is. Because in the midst of, we are building homes for displaced people. We have 7 million displaced people, internally displaced. That's essentially my country, a little bit less, that would move to France in 2 months. Okay, we have to accommodate these people. Of those 7 million people, like you, like me, all profession, all ages, all gender definitions, artists, race, 1.5 to 2 million by now really have no place to go back to, have lost absolutely everything. The last few months have been moved several times, from schools to gyms to hospitals to friends of friends. And so a few months after the war started, and we were collecting initially money in our international networks with my husband and another friend to address the very first urgent humanitarian needs of those fleeing the country and those staying in the country but trying to find a place to eat and sleep, we decided that it was that we needed to attend, although none of us knew how to do this, we were outside of our comfort zone. We needed to address the issue of a dignified housing solution. And we thought, is it temporary housing? It's not tent city, it's not ghetto. How long is this for? 5 months later, we started our own foundation called MoveUkraine, because we're moving people, homes, jobs, and lives. And we want to do it with dignity. Not always easy to explain that to big organizations. We've been very surprised at a lot of large NGOs or big institutions, the way they understand dignity. 1 shower for 60 people, that seems okay by certain big organizations. 1 shower for 60 people. Windows with no curtains. Lots of organizations come and say, you need 20 windows, you need 50 windows, you need 200 windows. Here's the windows, and they leave. Well, I can tell you that for the last few months, as it's getting colder in Ukraine, and people are living in old buildings, sometimes abandoned, they cover their windows with whatever materials they find. It can be cardboard, newspapers, and tape them with yellow tape. So they're living in darkness. Is the world not dark enough for them? These people that were evacuated under missiles, that have lost people, and now they sit in the dark. So when we come and we renovate, and we have generous donors, well-meaning donors that help us in, for example, providing beautiful new windows, when I ask them or others, do you have a budget for curtains? They look at me like I'm out of my mind, like it's a meaningless detail. But it's not. Because refugee or no refugee, They need to sleep in the dark like you and me. They need to have privacy when they draw their curtains or not. And I feel that what I've heard today, I experience every day in Ukraine. I experience the absolute worst that we fear in our human nature, the loss of our soul, the loss of our values, especially value for life. But I also experience what you've all been talking for and what you want to bring to this world, which is an amazing rebirth or amazing movement of absolute love as a form of resistance. When the Russians destroy a home, we rebuild it. People ask, why are you building homes? Investors don't want to come yet. Is it safe? Well, what's the option? Destroy a bridge, let them destroy it, don't rebuild it. You rebuild. Destroy it again, it's been rebuilt. Their bridges have been rebuilt 3 times. So my question to you, and I probably didn't bring any answers, but really, if you want to have the wonderful and important mission as a group, as an institution, to think about a better humanity, you have to stop its collapse. And the collapse is happening today in Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting their war and your war. Ukraine is fighting for freedom, and without freedom, there ain't no humanity of any sort. And it's also fighting for dignity. And without dignity, everything else goes. So I implore you, for those who really want to do this job seriously, start from the beginning. Start from the beginning and help Ukraine. You need to help us, MoveUkraine.org, to provide as many homes as we can. This is phase 1. These are temporary 5-year homes where people can live in dignity, but we're also providing greenfield communities. We're working with all kinds of groups to eventually rebuild Ukraine, and it will be built with new values, with spiritualism. We have artists, we have engineers. I met some here, an engineer here. We have people from all venues are coming together to think of this new rebuild Ukraine. It's an incredible opportunity for you to see what can come out of the ashes, because I agree with you. This is it, folks. This 21st century needs to change. It's not sustainable in any way, and certainly not for the next generation. So I implore you, please, if we talk about humanity, it starts with life and love of life. And if you don't stop what's happening now in Ukraine, don't be fooled. The cost will have been tremendous for us in Ukraine, but it will be even worse when it comes to your doors. And it will. So thank you for having me here. Thank you for praying for Ukraine, but above all, please, in all your respective fields, with your knowledge, please do everything. You have to do everything. You owe Ukraine your freedom, and you owe Ukraine dignity and maybe a new humanity. It's been built today in Ukraine, and that's why I'm there, because it fills me with joy, with love, with enthusiasm, with potential. I'm coming from the business background and some philanthropy and some education, but I see this as the grounds to experiment and try. Why not? Be empirical. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tuscia. And I think just a reminder of the mission of this group is to accelerate bold solutions for these kinds of challenges. You know, I think in the last 2 Humanity 2.0 forums, we've had a bit more of a focus on the technical implication and implementation of solutions and finding innovations. And that's still the vision and future focus. So if we can think about how to translate this great insight from this morning and think about all the incredible resources that are in this room. This is a tangible problem and a tangible opportunity for us to collaborate. Crenguta, I want to transfer to you, and I know there's some patterns and themes you're probably picking up on based on your background, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this idea of how philanthropy plays into restoring order and healing some of these broken elements in our society and these conflicts that have gotten out of control or spinning out of control. Can you speak to that based on your experience?
Thank you. It's very difficult for me at this moment to go back to another perspective that the immediate need that is so close to us in Ukraine. But I will try, nevertheless, to space out a bit and look at a bigger perspective and to look at what conflicts are and where conflicts come from. And usually conflicts come from a mentality, from a type of vision that is connected with the two keywords that I've heard today, which is scarcity, and it's about the perception of scarcity of something. And usually it's a fight over that kind of thing. And the other one is lack of love. Because in case of scarcity, that scarcity still can be shared, and focus should be built to build something that would get everybody out of the scarcity, rather than to fight in a sum zero type of game, which is usually the war. So in this context, I try to space out a bit and think about how could I bring to this discussion a vision that would help set up the foundation for a future thinking that would help avoid such conflict. And first of all, I think that we have to be aware where we are nowadays with the perception of reality. Because as long as we don't have the same perception of the reality, we will have conflicting views that will always put us in tension. And unfortunately, we are going to add new layers of confusion to those that we already have. Why? Because at this moment, we have a very simple situation in which we have our interior world and our exterior world, and that's it. But now technology is developing a mixed world in which we have augmented reality. For instance, those two chairs could very well be occupied by the virtual presence of another person, and we would have augmented reality. Or we may have virtual reality in which, with the help of VR eyes, or glasses, we would basically see something completely different than the exterior reality. And where this is getting, it's getting to an accumulation of experiences that are not all of them synchronized. So at this moment, we have different visions from the same reality, the exterior one, the ordinary one. In the future, we will have different visions originating from the way in which we are going to live into a mixed reality. We already have generations who have been exposed to the war games in which they are playing in an immersed experience in games in which they kill people without any kind of moral consequences, without any kind of legal consequences. And these are becoming part of their experience, part of their life. And these are crushing, basically, the common ground that we have at this moment, even this one conflictual, about how we perceive the exterior. So virtual reality and augmented realities are challenges that we need to think about. What can I say about this kind of development is that we need somehow to be aware that we need to introduce into this kind of new realities some commonly shared values that would help prevent developing a perception about lack of effects, lack of consequences, lack of damages, lack of potential harm to other human beings. The gaming industry has been confronted with this, but now we are moving into this reality in which we don't make the distinction very clear between game and not game. This very gathering here could have taken place absent every one of us from Vatican having the VR, having the setting of this room into virtual reality and just being there together. That is extremely powerful. And this is creating a mixture between the sensorial experience of the exterior and the interior building of our realities. This is creating at some point in time confusion as to responsibility. And this is powerful consequence for the future. In this respect, I thought how we can build a world that is better than the current one, even though it is more complex. So complexity normally should challenge us. And I thought that the thing that we could do is basically include moral values into the fabric of the reality. The analogy to which I sort of try to link myself is the Greek mythology, in which we had the layered universe of the Greek gods, and then this reality, and then the underworld, so basically the type of reality in layered universe. What happened in the Greek mythology is that the vision of the world, as explained in that one, is that humans have embedded values, moral values, and we have physical laws. Now, in the virtual reality, we could shape, with the help of software, behaviors that would include moral values as physical laws. So to be impossibly physically to kill somebody else, to be physically impossible to create a moral torture to somebody else. So these kind of embedded values into the fabric of the virtual and augmented realities might be one solution to improve some of the effects that I'm afraid, are at risk to see in the future. Another type of situation that I had in mind is how exactly help can get better into the context, into the situations that we are confronted with. At this moment, there is a development, international development, because of the technology, of new societal forms. So for now, we have basically different organizations, corporations, associations, different kind of NGOs. We have states, and we have multinational corporations or mixture of organizations like think tanks in which you have actors of different kinds. But what is developing in the last years is a type of relationship so-called distributed, with the help of the blockchain technology. And the distributed autonomous organizations, the DAOs, are a very interesting structure because basically they do not have governing bodies, but they do have an automated way of interaction between them. So basically what they do, they include the rules into the fabric of the interactions. They automize values. They include the values in an automated system. To me, that is a very interesting development, and what is most interesting is that these creatures, these kind of new organizations, first of all, they are international in the genuine sense, so they do not have borders. Second of all, they are self-sufficient. They do not need to anchor in the physical reality because they are interactions within the persons in the same system. Like, for instance, we would never get out of this room and we will simply interact between us. So they do not need necessarily to anchor in reality. They are ecosystems that have already their own currencies, the cryptocurrencies or the tokens in which they exchange. It's almost like the very old type of society, the antique one in which it was the primordial way of communication and of gatherings between people. Now, this kind of organizations might give us an idea about the automated values, how we can automate values, how we can link values in a relationship, how we can put moral values into the fabric of the relationships that we have. And with that, I will get to my last comment that I thought that I may bring to the table, and that is related to money. I'm not an economist, so please excuse me. This is out of the appropriate language for your science that I respect very much. I'm teaching myself at the University of Economics, but I'm teaching law. So I'm an unusual creature there. I think that as long as we look and we measure philanthropy in money, relationships, success, speed of growth, all kind of characteristics, we are living in a society in which the metrics of the society is money related. even the society itself, the GDP, everything is related always in money. Now, if this is the key word, I think it's almost like we would look at a human being and we would always say, how much blood do we have? Is it enough? Is it not enough blood? And that would be all. Do you think that an organism would be healthy enough if we would simply measure the blood? I honestly believe that it wouldn't. So how we move from this society to a society in which we have more than one value, the monetary value, and we give value to the others. Discussion has been done today about the nature capital, about the social capital, so about values that are related to something else than just the expression in money to that. To me, that is going back to a legal notion. And here is, I think, one of the biggest problems. In law, we define the type of rights in patrimonial and not patrimonial. Some that can be expressed in money and some that cannot be expressed in money. And you cannot have legal relationships but for those that are expressed in money. So basically, non-patrimonial rights, like the right for a name, etc., cannot be expressed in money, therefore they cannot be subject of a transaction. Fact is that this is not true. So in real life, we can transfer trust, hope, love. We can transfer enthusiasm. We can transfer profoundly important values that are not money quantified, so patrimonial values. And I think that one may wish to link the two. So we may use the link between the two to link the values to the money in such way as for those to circulate together in the corporate body in the society. An incipient level of this I have seen in Switzerland something that is interesting. It's called climate change scores. And basically, it's a ranking that every single corporation needs to use in order to be able to access financing. So money are not available by any financing institution unless you tick the box with those values. And those values are climate change related because of an international convention, COP21, listing those values. But this is expandable to everything else. So what I think that might be an option that I would put on your table is to link value, other values than money related to money, so for them to circulate together, exactly as we use the blood, if we want to transport some help. We include in the blood some help for the organism, and we use the network to transport, but we don't transport just blood. We transport blood plus the other values that are useful to the organism. So that would be an option that I thought. And how we can do that? Well, the new systems, the platforms, the blockchain system allows that. Why? Because the tokens are not only money, but they are money plus value together. And you can build something interesting in this system. I know that I touched a number of topics. For some of you will resonate maybe one of them, for some of you other. I just hope to be helpful in a way or another in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Crenguta. We've got thematically looking at the changing of value structures in Jonathan's talk, the crumbling of value structures in Tuscia's talk, and then these ideas and possibilities in Crenguta that you're putting forward in terms of how do we use technology and in a way that affirms the values that we talked about this morning. I'm aware of our time, so Jim, do you have any closing thoughts for this panel, and then we'll tee up the working groups?
This is great. So I guess a couple closing thoughts. I've had the opportunity recently to work with a large group of the big foundations in the United States and some medium-sized that have come together to see if they can collaborate on something. Because it turns out that they're structured to not be able to work together. So I build hospitals and you build access to hospitals, but I do that in Minneapolis and you do that in Baltimore. And it's shocking that we actually have to build access to hospitals in the same place. But we can't coordinate, we don't know how to do that. So they're coming together around how could we transform philanthropy and asking the question of can we, and what would that look like to do that from within? And it's a big question. Can we transform philanthropy to support the communities that we're trying to support and taking this up on their own? And there's some really fun, so the good news for me is that there are people who are trying to take this somewhat seriously and not just doing some more whitewashing, greenwashing. Saying, yeah, we did the diversity inclusion stuff, everybody had to take the course, and now we're back to our normal thing. But there are also some really deep core dynamics underneath this, these core stories underlying, well, how did we get our wealth? And so what I was able to do was interview a bunch of people who are experts in this area and look at some of the core dynamics, is what they asked me to do. And then what could they do to leverage and address that? And so I think there's great potential. There are a lot of people that are very interested in this, and there's some very core underlying dynamics, a set of transactive scarcity that are making it very difficult, if not impossible, to shift. But maybe to finish that sort of to where Jonathan had gone, is can we start to be explicit about some of the agreements that we've accepted? And then we can say, do we really want these? And then how can we start to shift these together? Such as we give away 5% of the foundation's money every year, and the rest continues to make money. And we have all the power, and we have all the resource, and we have often all the wisdom because, well, we made the money. And so we know how to go solve your problems. Versus saying, I'm going to let go of that I control the money still. I'm going to let go of that I decide how you implement what we're doing with the money. I'm going to let you bring in values of how those monies should be thought of and spent. And we're going to do that in a collaborative learning way. Those are some huge dynamics getting in the way of being able to take on something that they say they want to do. And so we're actually in the midst of finishing that first pass of that initiative up of, are you willing to look at, so to finish, are we willing to look at that underlying sacred story that exists? And are we willing to deal with some of these so that we can get to the next generation, as we were proposed, right? We said, can we move beyond where we are today and what's generating the problems that we have today? And there's some very deep, deep dynamics or tectonics there, but maybe we can address those. And so those are some of the questions that this group of philanthropists that I'm working with are struggling with.
Excellent, and I'm seeing that as well in that kind of same kind of dynamic in working with corporate foundations and family offices, where they're starting to ask these questions about our power that they have, the resources they have, how they approach local communities. So it's a positive thing. This community has an opportunity to speak into that and speak into some of these questions and bring exactly what Jonathan was talking about, this larger frame of what ways of knowing and engaging. We have one question. I noticed, Fiona, you had a question, and then we'll have another one as well here. Fiona? Oh.
University. So thank you very much, Jonathan, in particular, for your beautiful exposition on the kind of nature of philanthropy, and for the other speakers on the important kind of lessons that foundations need to listen to. I think another way of looking at philanthropy, Jim, is perhaps kind of seeing it as the freest form of risk capital. And it's, you know, the venture capitalists in the room, you know, the opportunity it has to invest in the kind of research and innovations that normal funding bodies, research funding bodies, or implementations, or INGOs are not able to do because there is a lack of evidence at this early stage. You know, and we're very proud to be part of a consortium in which Fetzer are also part, but also the two other Templeton foundations to fund this global flourishing study with Gallup. And this is the kind of foundational research that, you know, only philanthropy can really do. So yes, there's a conflict of interest, and yes, there's an imbalance of power, but it's this collaborative impact, this coming together of foundations, which I'm delighted to hear is happening in the US, and is also, I'm observing, happening in the development space with the Organization for Economic Development in Paris, of collaborative signing up to agendas and making commitments in terms of kind of principles of philanthropy and its role in contributing to specific areas, whether that's in developing countries or whether it's in specific fields such as education or healthcare. So, one thing we do have is the ability to catalyze and new fields, such as the field of human flourishing, and kind of provide a long-term mindset, the kind of patient capital that can lead to longer-term and more mainstream players to come into the field. So kind of really just doing a plug for philanthropy and the opportunities that it has, and its willingness, openness, and excitement about working across sectors, whether it's the academic research, which the Templeton Foundations focus on, or the corporate philanthropy, where you can see a pathway to actually impact and growth once an innovation has been proved to kind of work. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Fiona. And I want to go to Steve next, but that really tees up well to our later conversations and our work together afterwards, is thinking about how can these various groups and various forms of capital, whether that's philanthropic capital or investment capital, look at the various problems as opportunities and turn them into solutions. Steve, I was excited to hear what you had to say. As an epistemologist, I knew you had something to provide. Please.
Okay, actually, this question is for Crenguta. First of all, I'm really glad that you brought up the issue about, I think, an important issue, and I'm surprised it's taken till the end of the day to come up, the way in which our notion of reality is being altered by information technology is basically the infrastructure of our lives, and that obviously is going to do something to the way we perceive values. Right, and in a way, this kind of topic should have been foregrounded much earlier today, it seems to me. I mean, because this is going to be kind of, if we're talking about the future and the infrastructure of the future, this is kind of the leading edge of the problem, I would say. And then you started making some proposals, which I thought were kind of interesting, but also maybe a little, well, maybe not as easy as they perhaps one might wish. So you were talking first about the war games. And you're absolutely right about kids being, they're playing war games all the time, and there's no penalty for killing people. In fact, that's how you win, right? And so this is instilling very bad values in people. I think we all agree with that. And it's interesting, the prospect of actually having these kind of competitive games where you actually have to do good stuff in order to win. I understand that idea too. But of course, as we've got a community of people who are not just the users of this IT, but also they're involved in programming it, right? I think what you can end up getting, and maybe we'll just have to live with this, is hacking, right? So let's say we have some kind of regulation that officially says that video games, have to be organized in such a way that you have to do good things in order to win. There will be people who will be hacking, and there'll be a kind of dark web version of this that will take the ordinary video games and then redo them so that you can kill people all over again, right? Now, we might have to live with that. But that's one thing. The other thing was toward the end of the talk when you were going on about linking values to money, what that brought to mind to me, and I don't mean to be too sinister about it, but it brought to mind the Chinese social credit system. Okay, so the Chinese social credit system, right, if you're, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, right? I mean, China, with all of its vast surveillance system and ability to gather data and compile data from people from both state-based data and also corporate data based on your consumer habits and stuff like this, can actually effectively punish and reward people according to the kinds of decisions they're making in life and according to things that are socially acceptable and unacceptable. So if you don't pay your taxes, you won't be able to travel on a train or something like this. And not only that, there'll be name and shame lists, right? So you'll know who the bad people are and you shouldn't be associating with. Now, you see, there's a sense in which if we go down a kind of social engineering route of human flourishing, one might think that there is a kind of nice version of this that would be palatable. And some of your remarks suggest that you might be open to that. And maybe we should be open to that. But I do think that in a sense, we've already got a sense of what this would involve. It would involve, basically, I mean, there's privacy issues involved, at least from a Western standpoint. of all the kinds of data you would need to get to actually fruitfully shape people's behavior so that they're actually, moving in a better direction. The amount of data you'd need to get from people to make a substantial difference, which we already in principle have through consumer choices, right? So I do think there's a kind of meta-ethical issue maybe on top of this, right? That as we're trying to make people better, the way we'll go about doing it might be a little too authoritarian and involve too much social engineering that may in fact undermine the values that we might want to try to promote in the name of human flourishing. So I just put that on the table. I mean, I don't claim to resolve it, but I think this is kind of what the conversation's got to be about. Because I think what you're proposing is at a certain level, kind of practical in principle, right? That one could go down this route.
Yeah, in some ways we already are, right? Yeah, and so part of the challenge of this group is wrestling with the ethical challenges and how that impacts flourishing, how it impacts freedom going forward. Right?
In the legal profession, we have a science which is at the border between law and sociology. It's the criminology, which is basically the science to address the non-compliant behavior and the way to cure that. And we have different categories of sanctions that might help: educative, restorative, or just removing the person and the danger from the society. So it's a whole science. The only problem that we are facing, that I would give to some specificity now, is the following: that the interconnectivity at this moment, it's so high because of technology and because of money, both of them, somehow related, because we can have this kind of payments everywhere, that this is almost like an organism in which you cannot longer isolate the element of non-compliance. Let's say the illness, you cannot isolate it. The contagion, if you want to move to biology analogies, is complete. That's why we have also, economically speaking, world crisis, etc., because we are very much connected. And it can be bad, but it can be good if we use the same channels to transfer something that would repair the system. That's all. It's one of the options. It's not perfect.
Excellent. Thanks for the response, and also teeing up further conversation over drinks and dinner and in the working groups. What we want to do now is briefly, very briefly, introduce the working groups and tee up tomorrow's conversations. So I'm going to ask the working group leads, starting with Matt Lee, to just give a brief commercial on what's going to happen tomorrow and what we'll be seeking to achieve in those working groups.
Thank you, Ron. So tomorrow, if you're interested in quantitative assessment of flourishing, join our working group co-moderated with Joe Daly and Laura Taylor. Byron Johnson has been kind enough to bring 35 reports on the development of the Global Flourishing Studies survey, and we can pass those out and look at the process there for trying to understand flourishing across very different cultures, and what kinds of adjustments have been made and how we might learn from that. But more generally, just sharing our experiences with different ways of quantitatively assessing flourishing. I understand from Kierkegaard that the moment you quantify love, it ceases to be love. So I'm not unaware of that. But there is great value in trying to tell a story of large groups of people with representative samples. And so if you're interested in your own work with your organizations about how to become involved in that kind of conversation and then a process leading to such assessment, please join us and help us further understand it as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Father Ezra, do you want to just give a brief commercial about the qualitative approaches to human flourishing?
I want to be in the quantitative group. Yeah. But so what we'll do in the qualitative group is Father Philip and I are going to lead a discussion about some of the issues that have been brought up here and some of the disagreements. And I think it's good to allow those to come to the surface, focus on those. And we'll also talk about other measurements that haven't been discussed so far. Things, Ron slightly, he talked about human freedom and the issue of politics. And we're not going to talk about political parties or anything like that, but what role do regulations and politics play in human flourishing, and trying to see the interactions of human beings on that higher level. And this was also something that Carmen had brought up, that in some cultures, everything is political because everything is communal. And so it's important to allow that to form part of our discussion. So we're not going to recreate the U.S. Constitution, but we will discuss some of those communal aspects of flourishing to a greater degree.
Excellent. Thank you, Father. Ty, do you want to give a quick overview of the workshop from your end?
So Erica and I are co-hosting the What Can Businesses Do to Incorporate Human Flourishing? And I think it'd be really important, because I think, John, you had some comments around that. What we would like to do is make it a working session. No presentations, no prepared speeches, but really look at, roll our sleeves up and think about how can you do it. And some of the points that you raised, to some of the comments that were made by the panel, I think it'd be really interesting to dive deeper, because that gives us a sense of what we're doing. But that's, it's not just corporate types. Anything. We'd love to have you. I'd love to be at Quantitative. I'd love to go to your session. But,
Sorry.
Unfair. Unfair.
Great, thanks. And then the last one will be the philanthropy group and philanthropy nonprofits, and we'll be exploring how does philanthropy tactically help support the researchers and the research community, the mapping of all the various efforts that are going on that Jonathan mentioned, and then nonprofits as well, the nonprofits that are on the ground that are implementing these activities. Yeah, you bet. Go ahead, Erica.
So just an observation, a question, a suggestion. As it relates to philanthropies, there are 86,000 philanthropies in the U.S. They have over $1 trillion in assets collectively. They give away about $90 billion a year. So what I suggest is we should think in the terms of consistency. So my concern is that the vast majority of these philanthropies don't align their values and their assets. So I think that from the standpoint of consistency, when we're trying to get something done, corporations, corporate social responsibility, we should really focus on how do you be more consistent, because I think that could be very constructive.
That makes total sense and resonates, I'm sure, on the business side as well with the ESG and impact conversation as well.